Principles of External Fixation. This is from the OTA Core Curriculum Resident Lecture Series version 5. Slides are by Dr. Ritesh Hoker, and I am Sakib Rahman narrating. This is a credit statement for the author. The objectives will first try to help you understand a historical perspective of external fixation, understand indications, understand frame types and component, understand mechanics of external fixation and how to optimize that. We'll talk a little bit about MRI compatibility, biology, and complications. So, some historical perspective, stabilizing fractures externally has been around for a while, described by Hippocrates 2,400 years ago using this external device with 4 flexible rods of European dogwood of equal length with leather straps, and this allowed for inspection of potentially an open wound and helped to stabilize the fracture. Malgini in 1843 described this type of a turnbuckle and a claw technique for compressing a patella fracture. As you can see here, this similar device has been used for clavicle fixation. What about monolateral external fixation? Well, this was first started to appear in 1893 with implanted pins connected with twists of wire covered in iodoform gauze, as shown here. And other versions of this, as shown here by Dr. Parkhill in 1897, using silver-coated threaded pins to help prevent infection. And in 1937, with a fixator that looks very similar to devices we may use today. So the original Hoffman design by Raoul Hoffman looks a little bit like what you see on the left. Again, somewhat similar to what we see today with a universal ball joint, fracture reduction in 3 planes, the ability to perform interfragmentary compression, limb length restoration. Dr. Charnley's compression fixator, for example of a knee fusion, is shown here to the right. These are all external fixation devices. De Bastiani and Goetzen in 1970 described the monotube external fixator that allows for fracture dynamization and transport. And as shown on the right, some of the earlier AO fixators in the 1977 AO manual shows a monoplanar type external fixator as shown here. What about circular fixation? So this is using circular rings with transfixion tensioned wires, and these were also described by Dr. Gabriel Elizarov, and these were brought over to Europe and to the United States. So in 1948, Dr. Gabriel Elizarov started developing the distraction technique for using circular fixators and essentially growing new bone, and this could help to manage bone defects and treat infections. Dr. Carlo Mauri in 1980 introduced this to the West, to Europe, and then eventually the United States, and American surgeons started to travel to Siberia to learn these methods. Let's talk about indications of external fixation. Well, these include open fractures. These also include closed fractures with high-grade soft tissue injury, vascular injury with acute repair. So oftentimes when you have a vascular injury that's just been repaired, this can be protected with an external fixator. Multiple long bone fractures in critically ill patients where you're doing a damage control approach. This is where external fixators can be used in a fracture that otherwise might be treated definitively differently, and you still can convert to that definitive fixation later. We also do it as temporary fixation in complex periarticular fractures. So many of you will see this very frequently, extensively commented in tibia pilon fracture, for example, or tibial plateau fracture. Also used for acute management in pelvic ring injuries or fractures with compartment syndrome, sometimes with non-unions. Infected bone, like an osteomyelitis, You already saw an example for bone transport, limb lengthening. These can also be used for gradual deformity correction and for arthrodesis when you saw an example of that. So pretty versatile. If you think about it, there's a lot of different ways to do external fixation. And I think, especially in modern orthopedic management now, some of you may only see external fixators used for staged management of a periarticular fracture. And a lot of learners and students will see an external fixator and say, okay, that's what you use for preliminary management of something. Well, that is one use, but look at all the other uses that we have used and continue to use external fixators for. So if you think about different frame types, there's unilateral, which is one bar attached to clamps and oftentimes half pins in one plane. There's bilateral, which are transfixion pins, for example, and bars attached to either side of the limb. There's multiplanar, so you may have, for example, half pins in two or more planes, like a delta frame across the ankle joint. And there are ring fixators, which are also multiplanar by definition, but these are like Ilizarov type frames or Taylor spatial frames. So you can have a standard frame, which is something you'd use for a diaphyseal fracture. It doesn't really cross the joint, so it allows joint motion. Or you can have a joint spanning frame, which can be non-articulated, like if you have a comminuted intra-articular distal tibia fracture or periarticular fracture, or you're doing arthrodesis. Or you could have something articulated, like maybe a comminuted fracture of the elbow. You could potentially allow for motion and articulation. And then you could have a distraction or correction frame, and these are frequently ring fixators. So if you think about frame components, there are pins, there are rods, clamps, rings, and transfixion wires. Of course, rings are sort of what you see in the Ilizarov type frames that have like wires and rings, and you can also have hybrid frames that have sort of a combination of these different components. So let's talk about the pin-bone interface. And this is, the stability of the pin-bone interface is the most important factor in overall stability of an external fixator construct. It's the only thing fixing the bone. So things that affect that are pin geometry and thread design, pin biomaterials and biocompatibility, pin insertion technique. So if you think about it, the pin is the critical link between the bone and the frame. It transmits all the forces applied to the bone fragments from the skeleton to the external fixator, right? So pin loosening and subsequent pin infection is something that continues to be a problem. And if you think about it, these are external devices with the pin that goes in bone. So there's this sort of communication between the bone and the external environment via the pin site. So that pin-bone interface is really critical. So what about pin design? Well, the bending stiffness of a pin is proportional to the radius to the fourth power. So if you increase just a little bit in pin core diameter, the bending stiffness goes up substantially. When you leave a pinhole behind, that's a potential risk factor. So a pinhole greater than 1/3 of the bone's diameter will substantially increase the risk of a fracture. So it's great to sort of go up in pin size if you need bending strength, but you are doing that at a cost of potential fracture. So here are some examples of different pins. These, they're numbered here. So the pin number 1 is like a 5 millimeter. You can see it's self-tapping. It's got those flutes with a short thread length. The thread length looks like it ends about here. Number 2 is a 5 millimeter self-tapping pin with longer threads. Type 3, you can see this looks a little different. This is HA coated, and that's an hydroxyapatite coated pin. And then number 6 is it's a little bit of a larger, like a 6 millimeter self-tapping, and this is a different material. It's a titanium pin. So what about number 5? Number 5 this is actually a tapered pin. So if you look at this versus this, there's actually a taper that goes up, right, in the diameter of the pin, and that helps to facilitate subsequent pin removal. Here you can see there's a self drilling pin with the drill bit type tip. Number 7, you can see there's sort of a pin with this like very large thread pitch and deeper thread depth. So if you're going into more cancellous bone, that might be helpful. Number 8 shows like a bit of a smaller pitch and shallow thread depth. So if you're going in cortical bone, and 9 is another HA coated bone. And the reason to do hydroxyapatite coating is that can help to improve that pin bone interface by encouraging direct bone apposition and ingrowth. So what we talked about in the last slide. So what about pin biomaterials? So stainless steel pins are traditional, but titanium alloy pins also are out there. They have a much lower modulus of elasticity that we talk about in the biomechanics lecture. There's much less pin-bone interface stress, and potentially there's less site of pin infection and better osseointegration. So we talked about hydroxyapatite-coated pins having good pin-bone interface fixation. There's less fibrous tissue interposition. So if you're going to have a pin in for a very long period of time, not just a temporary fixator, then these things start to become more relevant. And that's a case where you may need to have an HA-coated pin, especially if you're putting a pin in a short segment of cancellous bone, let's say, or osteoporotic bone. And that's where it really matters. And you can see here there's just better, so on the left A, you have sort of a standard screw, and you can see that there's potentially even a little bit of loosening that takes place. Whereas on the right, the HA-coated pin, you can just see sort of better bone integration distributed along the screw surface, even extending intramedullary a little bit. So that kind of shows that difference. So pre-drilled pins and radial preload. So pre-drilled pins require a pilot hole to be drilled prior to putting the pin in. So the pin is not necessarily self-drilling. So when you do it, the pilot hole should be equal to or slightly less than the pin core. So if it's slightly less, that allows for radial preload to pre-stress that pin bone interface in a circumferential fashion. So that is, as the screw goes into the hole, there's sort of this, sort of radial preload that goes out in every direction to sort of improve that fixation. And if you pre-drill, you can have lower peak insertion temperature, less thermal necrosis and bone damage, possibly lesser chance of loosening, although this is controversial. So a lot of people do like pre-drilling for this reason. However, there are also self-drilling pins, which have less time of insertion, especially when time really, really matters. Maybe you're in a case with a vascular injury, and you're putting pin after pin. I mean, it adds up. So if the pin doesn't have to be on for a long period of time, then like a temporary fixator, like a lot of them that we do, this may be completely sufficient. You just have to be careful when you put a self-drilling pin in that when the drill tip is hitting the far cortex and hasn't cut through yet, that near cortex potentially can get stripped. So you do have to be careful of that. There is more depth of insertion required to pass that drilling portion beyond the far cortex. You have to be careful not to injure structures on the other side of the bone. There's going to be more heat on insertion, and there's a risk of microfracture both the near and far cortices because it's a little bit more traumatic putting these in, and potentially lesser pull-out strength. So for pin insertion technique, you want to incise the skin directly at the site of pin insertion, dissect down to bone, incise the periosteum if feasible, avoid obviously neurovascular structures, advance your trocar and drill sleeve directly so you don't trap soft tissues when you drill, avoid transcortical drilling, pre-drill with a sharp drill of diameter equal to or slightly less than that pin core. And there's different pins we use for different bones. So a femur could be a 5 or 6 millimeter pin. A tibia is like usually 5. Humerus is 5. Forearm is 4. And then hand and foot are usually about 3. And you're usually never going to go over 6. Otherwise, most adult bone, you're going to run into the risk of having a stress riser. So after pre-drilling, insert the appropriate size pin, less than a third of the bone shaft diameter. We talked about this before to avoid fractures. Insert with slow speed and low torque. And you can irrigate to cool as you're doing this. And I encourage you to head over to ota.org and go to OTA online. You can view some really excellent videos. One of them is on an ankle spanning external fixator that goes through this technique. All right, we're going to pause there and we'll pick up with anatomic considerations in the next video. Thanks.